ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for clicking on another Rank the Movies video. This week we start our horror 2 months. We've got the last 2 weeks of September, last 3 weeks of September, all of October, and 2 weeks in November. Primarily we're going to talk about horror movie franchises, but this week we're talking individual horror movies that only had one sequel, or horror movies where you don't want to watch the sequel at all. There is no final ranking on these movies. These movies are in descending order, so my least favorite I'm going to talk about is at the top. My most favorite will be at the bottom of this list. So, sit back, relax. We got 20 of them to go over, not counting movies with sequels, where there are 2 of them. So that's 22 movies we're going to talk about really quick. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of coffee, put on your earbuds, and turn them up with whatever you're doing so you can really listen to what I'm about to say. There might be a quiz at the end. There's not going to be a quiz, but you never know when it comes to me. There might be a quiz. Who knows? So here we go. Rank the movies. We're doing one-off horror films this week. So, to start off with, we're going to talk about the movie 9 Dead, starring Melissa Joan Hart, who you may remember as Clarissa from Clarissa Explains It All, and was featured in the movie Drive Me Crazy. Why I remember that is because I'm a weird guy who remembers a lot of weird stuff about movies. So, 9 Dead. This is a really interesting horror movie, and I so love it. Some people might even call it a horror film, but I'm categorizing it in this anyways, because I want to. And it's my show, so screw you, it's a horror film. Basically, it's about 9 people who are trapped in a room. They're each handcuffed to a pole. A man with a blue mask on comes in and tells them they have 10 minutes to figure out why they're all connected. He doesn't give them any information, just that in 10 minutes he's going to walk in and kill one of them if they can't tell him why they are all in that room. The 9 people who vary from a cop. You have a cop, you have Melissa Joan Hart, who's a district attorney. You have a couple felons, mafioso. You have a gangbanger, you have just a normal, everyday guy, a woman who speaks Korean because she's Korean and works in a Korean deli. Yep, you have a priest in this room, you have an insurance adjuster in this room, trying to figure out why they're all in this room. And every 10 minutes, the blue-faced man keeps his word and walks in and shoots one of them, which makes the entire thing a little more difficult because they still need to figure out why everyone is in that room, including the dead people. But of course, the blue-faced man does something that most killers in revenge stories don't do. Before he shoots them, he whispers into their ear why they are in that room. So they actually die knowing what they did and how they have wronged this man. It's a really interesting story as they piece it together. Because of course, it's not a good mystery if they don't inevitably piece it together by the end of the movie. It's a really fun movie. It moves very fast. It's basically a play because, again, you have 9 people in a room. It cuts away to other scenes, primarily flashbacks to them figuring out why they're in the room. But it was really interesting how they piece it together, how they figure out how 2 people connect and how that can build to the third, and how it's not just about direct connection, because some people are there for a very minimal connection, but their existence led to the inevitability of what happened. So they're held as responsible. I link this a lot to Murder on the Orient Express, and that kind of story, just kind of in reverse, because somebody did die. And these 9 people are each in part, and even, like I said, microscopic parts, but in part responsible for that person's inevitable death, some more responsible than others, and therefore, it is that idea that they all had that microscopic part. When Murder at the Orient Express, all of these characters are connected, even though they don't look like they should be. It's that same idea, and figuring out how one person dying can truly branch out and affect the lives of all these other people, whether they knew it or not. It's a great movie, and that's why it made this list. Moving on, we're going to talk about a movie called April Fool's Day. This is the original April Fool's Day. It got a remake. I never watched it. I'm never going to because it's probably bad. This is a classic 80s horror film. You have your rich white girl who has inherited her father's estate, on an island. She brings out a bunch of her college friends to spend the weekend on the island with her, and they start dying one by one. And it's just it's a really good time. It's got a great twist at the end. I'm trying not to spoil these movies if any of the viewers would want to go watch them, but it's got a great twist at the end. It's a fun movie, it keeps moving, and just really enjoyable. It's hard to get in deeper into this movie without giving away the ending of it all. But it is a whodunit. Who's the person killing all these people, and why are they killing them? Kind of slasher film that, again, it's got a great twist. You're never going to see it coming. It is worth checking out. Next up, I want to talk about American Psycho, starring Christian Bale, Willem Dafoe, Reese Witherspoon, and Jared Leto. American Psycho is based on a book by the same name. I tried reading the book once. I didn't get past the 3rd chapter. The movie, however, is paced better than the book. You have Christian Bale plays our Psycho. Patrick Bateman. Bateman is a kind of standard 1970s yuppie, Wall Street yuppie, who, on his spare time, mutilates people. Because his yuppie lifestyle doesn't satisfy all of his convictions. Because yuppie murders needs to be satisfied just as well. Willem Dafoe plays the detective who is investigating some murders, especially that of Jared Leto, who disappears early in the film after you see Bateman kill him. This movie also has a weird ending to it. Mainly, it makes you question what's happened. Which is a great idea. It's a great idea to have that question, because Bateman is definitely a psycho, but you have to start questioning, how is he psychotic? What is his psychosis by the end of the movie? He gets really gruesome with some of the murders. Not like on-screen gruesome, just the idea of gruesome is there. It's not really a splatter film. Some people are going to tell you that, but it's not. It's not a gory splatter film. Though it is there is gory splatter, but it's not about the gory splatter. Alright, next up, I want to talk about Munchies. This movie is a ripoff of Gremlins, but I like it anyways. I'm sorry, not Roger Corman. I am talking about the wrong person, though I'm not far off with who I'm talking about here. But basically, you have an archaeologist. He discovers, out with his son, on a date, they discover a statue. It's a fossilized Munchie, to be perfectly honest. They take it home, it gets electrocuted. The electrocution changes it from its stone form into an actual being. It seems friendly, it seems nice. The archaeologist's brother, twin brother, because the only actor worth note is Corman, and I can't think of his first name. I want to say Roger Corman, but I know I'm wrong because Roger Corman is the director. He is the actor who's in such films as Spaceballs. He's not in Spaceballs, he's in High Anxiety, he's in History of the World Part 1. Honestly, the name is slipping me right now, but he plays both parts because he's the only actor of any, at the time, note in that movie, though, there is a Gremlins 2 connection in this movie that Robert Picardo, who plays one of the Clamp's jackass assistant in Gremlins 2, does actually play a role in this movie as well. So that's kind of cool. Anyways, you find out the Munchies reproduce by slaughtering them. They get cut up, the first Munchie gets cut up with a knife, and each piece grows a new Munchie. So that's how they reproduce. It's not by getting them wet, it's by chopping them up. And they begin to wreak havoc on this small town over 4th of July weekend. Again, it is a Gremlins parody. Copy, clone, but it's done in a fun manner. It's definitely trying to be more comedic than Gremlins would be, kind of skewing more what Gremlins 2 would be, although this predates Gremlins 2, in what it offered. It is an unusual movie, but it's a fun movie. It's a fun creature film. If you've never checked it out, do so. It has a couple of sequels that have nothing to do with the original. They became family kid films, so that's all I got to say about that. About their sequels. I've never watched them because they're not based on this movie. If they were based on this movie, I'd have watched them because I loved this movie when I was a kid because I had no taste. Moving on. Alright, we have Tales from the Hood and its sequel, Tales from the Hood 2. These are both anthology horror films. Basically, they are a series of... Anthology horror is a series of short movies. We talked about it when we did Demon Knight, based on comic books. That was based on Tales from the Crypt, and that movie was an anthology series, and that movie was not an anthology movie, so I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't know if we've ever talked about an anthology movie on this show before now. So it's made up of little segments. The first one has 5 segments to it, and the second one has 3 segments to it, with a wraparound narrative to both of them. The second one isn't bad. It's on here because it is a sequel. It's not bad. It's not great. The stories are... And if you watch the first one and really love it, the second one's bad, but it's watchable. The first one, it's a much more interesting story. You have a couple of gangbangers showing up to buy some drugs from a mortician. The mortician takes them around his mortuary, showing them various coffins, and then telling the story of each coffin. One of them is a cop, a former cop, who was slain because of a race incident he was a part of, with all of his fellow officers involved also being murdered. You have a white supremacist who is destroyed because he moves into a old slave plantation and disturbs the spirit of the slaves who died there. You have a story of a gangbanger who goes through kind of a Clockwork Orange type of reprogramming session to try to make him a better person. You have a child who views his stepfather as a monster because of what he does to him and how he defeats the monster. And there is a 5th story which totally is blanking on my mind. It's an interesting tale, and it's got some really good actors in it. Corbin Burnson is in it. David Alan Grier is in it. Cedric Williams III plays the mortician. He is so good in this movie. It's definitely worth checking out if you've never seen it. Again, the sequel isn't bad. It instead uses Keith David plays the mortician because Clarence Williams III is no longer with us. So Keith David steps in as the mortician, and instead it's about a military test, and he's telling these stories to kind of fill in the blanks while they're waiting for stuff to happen in this test. Again, the second one isn't great. The first one is actually very entertaining and definitely worth the watch. Alright, next we have Chud! Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers. And let me tell you, I knew that long before I ever saw this movie. I used that as jokes in plays I've written. Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers, Chud. But I finally sat down and watched this movie, and it's a super enjoyable movie. Basically, it takes place in New York City. There are cannibalistic humanoid underground dwellers in the sewers. They're eating homeless people, and they're threatening to come out of the sewers. There are a couple of people, including someone who runs a homeless shelter who's noticing the homeless population dwindling, and a cop and a photographer who are each kind of drawn in to this crisis as they try to figure out why are these things in the sewers and how do you stop them. The movie stars Daniel Stern as one of our main characters and features a very young John Goodman. Like super young. He's in one scene and I'm pretty sure he dies in it. But it's a really entertaining film. It's very well done. It does have a sequel. I've never seen Chud 2. But Chud, it's a fun film, and it really does do what you want this kind of movie to do, because it is slightly comedic at the same time it is being a horror film. Next up, I want to talk about Slaughterhouse. This movie is hilarious for a couple of reasons. It's actually a very well done horror film. You start off with a very long introduction of how a large group, ridiculous, like comically large group of cool kids torment the nerdy kid, which leads to him spilling hydrochloric acid onto his face on April Fool's Day. That's important. It is now their 10-year class reunion, and the comically large group of mean kids return to the high school to partake in their reunion. Just to begin to be slaughtered off one by one by the kid they pranked 10 years prior, because he set the whole thing up. The funny part about this movie is it's an April Fool's movie, much like April Fool's Day earlier, which again takes place on April Fool's Day. It's a holiday-themed movie. This one was also an April Fool's Day-themed movie. It was set in America, made in England, and in England, April Fool's Day works far different than it does in America, because in England, Apparently, at noon, if you pull a prank, you're the fool. So they're just trying to live until noon when you can't kill them anymore because April Fool's Day is done. It's weird because it takes place in America. But it doesn't take away from the overall good of this movie. It is a good slasher film. It's definitely worth checking out. It's got music by Harry Mandolfini, who did the music in Friday the 13th, and it's very evident that he is reusing some of his score. But it's a great score, so it's definitely worth listening to. I like Slaughterhouse. I heard about it by watching old episodes of Monster Vision with Joe Bob Briggs. I got a copy of it to watch the movie. I do not regret that decision. Next up, we have Creepshow, and its official sequel, Creepshow 2. Creepshow 2, kind of like Tales from the Hood 2, not as good. Creepshow is also a five-tale anthology film. It's another anthology film. All the tales are written by Stephen King. The movie itself is directed by George Romero, who next week we'll get into a lot more of George Romero. But right now we're just going to talk about this movie. Again, you get 5 stories. It's Tales from the Crypt before Tales from the Crypt was a thing, because you have the ominous creep, who looks a lot like the Crypt Keeper, because again, these are based off of the EC Comics, much like Tales from the Crypt was. And each story is kind of a horror story. And you get some great actors in this. You have Adrienne Barbeau is in one, Leslie Nielsen, Ted Danson appears in one of these. Stephen King himself acts in one of these. The stories you get, you start off this entire movie with a really interesting story called Happy Birthday, which is about a old rich guy who dies, and they still have to celebrate his birthday because he's old and rich, or Father's Day, I can't remember which, and I just rewatched this movie recently, and he raises from the dead and starts killing his family. Okay, it's an interesting start. You then move on to a second one where a rock falls from the sky, a hillbilly farmer played by Stephen King touches it, and it begins to grow fungus all over the place, basically everything it touches, including him, and he tries to deal with it. You get another story, which is called The Crate. It has a great story. Great story. About a crate from the Arctic that's found in the basement of a university, and the creature that lives inside of it who murders people, but loves the safety of his crate because that's what he knows. You then have another story about a spurned husband who takes vengeance on his wife and her lover by burying them in the sand at low tide, so when high tide comes, they'll drown, and it all wraps up with a dude who suffers from horrible agoraphobia, having his entire, hermetically sealed apartment being invaded by cockroaches. It is just some great storytelling by Stephen King, great directing by George Romero. It has the official sequel, Creepshow 2, where they cut it down to 3 stories, including one, and it has less oh, look at these actors. It is more, it was done. The best one from that one is one called The Raft, where a bunch of teens go out and swim to a raft in the middle of a lake, where there's actually a brown, oozy, black, gelatinous, oily mass that is eating them. This is the best one in Creepshow 2. There's an unofficial third movie called Creepshow 3. I've never seen it. Tales from the Dark Side of the movie is also called Creepshow 3 as a spiritual successor. That is a great movie, and there's possible in the future we'll talk about it, possibly the future of this list. I don't remember off the top of my head, but that I didn't lump it in with this. And then, of course, Shudder has released the Creepshow TV show, which is also a lot of fun to watch. So Creepshow, definitely check it out. The first one, maybe check out the second one. Alright, next up we're going to talk about Krampus, our Christmas horror movie. Yay, Christmas horror movie! It's about the Krampus who comes to slay evil children and their parents. It's a great movie. It's a great holiday classic. Basically, you have a family and their extended family lose faith in Santa Claus, and Krampus comes to take them all away. It's a great film. I saw it twice in theaters because I was just so overwhelmed by it. And every Christmas, it's that season I watch this movie because, if you're not watching a weird horror film around Christmas time, what's the point of watching Die Hard, right? But Krampus is a good time. It's definitely worth the watch. Next up, 10, Cloverfield Lane. This is the second of the Cloverfield trilogy, and the only one of them I actually like. The first movie isn't bad. It takes a lot for me to like a found footage type movie. Next week we'll get to that again, but it takes a lot for me to really like one of those movies. So although I don't regret watching Cloverfield, I didn't care for it that much. And the Cloverfield paradox is bad. It's just bad. But 10 Cloverfield Lane is actually a pretty entertaining movie. You have a woman who gets ran off the road. She gets taken to a bunker by John Goodman. She's told that there's been an invasion by aliens and that they have to stay in the bunker because it's not safe outside. There's another man in the bunker played by John Gallagher who kind of forced his way into the bunker at the start of the invasion. So it's really about these three people living together in this tight, enclosed space of this bunker. Even though it has multiple rooms, it's still, it's a tight, enclosed space. And then trying to work together, and this rising suspicion that maybe there isn't anything wrong outside. And the realization of if that is true or not. It's a great film, and it's definitely worth checking out. I really enjoyed it. And again, I don't take away because it has the Cloverfield title to it. Because you know what? You can make a good movie and not care for the other parts of the series. Next up, we have Stephen King's The Stand. This is a miniseries. Much like it has 4 parts to it. It's based on the book of the same name by Stephen King. And it is about a virus called Captain Trips that wipes out the world, makes people sick, and the few people who do not get sick basically break up into 2 groups. One group follows Satan to Las Vegas. The other group follows Mother Abigail, who talks to God, to Denver, Colorado. And the idea is that eventually these 2 groups need to have contact to settle the difference between the good and the bad. It's a very interesting movie, and I always enjoyed it. I've never read the book because, honestly, I'm never going to read that much in my life. That book would fill like a 1.5 year quota for me reading, and I like reading. It's a big book. But, spending 8 hours watching this movie-ish, it's way better. It's very interesting, very well acted. You got Gary Sinise, you got Molly Ringwald, you got Rob Lowe in this thing. It's very well done and definitely worth the time. Next up, we have Sorority Babes and the Slime Ball Bolorama. That's a mouthful of a title. Sorority Babes and the Slime Ball Bolorama. Basically, a group of nerds crash a sorority initiation, and the 2 girls who are being initiated and the 3 nerds are told that since the initiation did not happen the way it was supposed to, they are to go to the bowling alley in the mall, because this was back when bowling alleys were in malls, and steal one of the trophies. They find out that the trophy they steal, when they break it open, has a magical imp inside. A wish-granting magical imp. Begins granting them wishes, and then they start getting killed, because magical imps kill people. It is a low-class B horror film, but it is super entertaining. I really enjoy this film. As much as it is, low-class B movie. It stars Leanna Quigley, who's in Night of the Demons, and another movie we're going to talk about at the top of this list. She's in that as well. It doesn't have any other notable actors in it, but it is a fun movie. Once you get over the fact that there's a lot going on that's just going on because of it's a low-budget horror film. But it's such a fun low-budget horror film. Plus, look at the title. Sorority Babes and the Slime Ball Bolorama. Come on. It's a great title. Alright, next up, we're talking Ghost Ship. Ghost Ship. It is, falls in that first level of Dark Castle films with House on Haunted Hill and 13 Ghosts. I touched on 13 Ghosts during Remake-a-thon, and House on Haunted Hill is number 100 in my top 100 movies of all time. So Ghost Ship is the movie that came out in between those. It's not actually based on another William Castle story. It is an original story. Basically, it starts off with the greatest opening to any horror movie I've ever seen, with the massacre of a cruise ship full of people. It then cuts into the future where the cruise ship has been found, and a group of salvagers go out to try to salvage the cruise ship as it is found salvaged, and anything on it would be theirs for the taking. When they get there, they find out the ship is haunted, and they begin slowly dying off one by one. It is a great film. It is a fun film. I always enjoy watching it, and it is a really super good time. And definitely, it is worth checking out as it is towards the top of this list. Not the top, but it's towards the top. Next up, we have Chopping Mall. I have not talked about this many movies in a long time, and I'm feeling it. So we have Chopping Mall. Chopping Mall is another great B-horror movie. It is about a shopping mall that brings in a new protector robot. These robots are to monitor the hall. They are to be non-lethal force in protecting the mall. Something goes wrong, a lightning storm comes and strikes their power processor on the roof, and the robots go homicidal. Instead of protecting the mall with non-lethal force, they protect the mall with lethal force. A bunch of mall employees and their girlfriends, or they're also all mall employees. But anyway, we have 4 men and 4 women have spent the night at the mall to play around in a mattress store. When they try to leave, the protectors show up and they start killing them off one by one. It is a fun time in the Chopping Mall. It's a great movie. This is a Roger Corman film. He produced it, and it is a super fun time. I enjoy this movie. I've watched it a couple of times now. It's just a lot of fun, and I highly suggest checking it out. Next up, we have Death Becomes Her. This is more of a comedy, and it is one of the films that was supposed to be originally planned out as a Tales from the Crypt movie, but they decided the script was too good. Robert Zemeckis decided just to direct it himself and not use the Tales from the Crypt name, though it does use the Tales from the Crypt music in its trailer. You have Meryl Streep, Goldie Hawn, and Bruce Willis. Basically, Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn are friends who also happen to be enemies, fighting over the same man, Bruce Willis. Eventually, they find out the key to eternal life, and then they both swiftly kill each other. Now they have eternal life and eternal youth, but they're dead. And Bruce Willis, being a plastic surgeon, is trying to keep them together. It's a fun movie. It's got a lot of great moments in it. Bruce Willis is terrific. Goldie Hawn, Meryl Streep, they're all great in this movie. It is a super, super good movie, and definitely worth watching this Halloween season. Next up, I want to talk about The Final Girls. The Final Girls is more comedy than horror, but it is kind of a horror parody. It's horror light. I am now standing up and my head is being cut off, but that's okay. I can slouch a little. So we have The Final Girls. It's more horror light. Basically, it is the Friday the 13th archetype of movie, except it has a caveat. Beginning of the movie, you find out that there is a movie called Camp Blood. Camp Blood is a very popular horror movie, like Friday the 13th was. And they're going to be doing a showing of Camp Blood and the sequel, Camp Blood 2. Camp Blood 2. Our main character, her mother actually acted in Camp Blood. She has now died, and she's asked to go to the screening as a special guest. A fire breaks out during the movie, and her friends run to try to get to an emergency exit behind the movie screen, but when they cut the movie screen open and walk in through the movie screen, they are transported into the movie. They are now in Camp Blood. And I honestly feel like I'm getting the title of the movie incorrect, that it's not called Camp Blood, but I'm going to keep calling it that, because that's what I can think of right now. So anyways, they're now in this typical slasher movie, and one of them has all the knowledge of what happens in the movie, and obviously the girl whose mom was in the movie, she now sees her mom in a much younger state in this movie, and she's trying to connect with the only vintage of her mom she has left. It is a really good movie. It's a really clever movie. It has no gore in it whatsoever, so if you're looking for the nudity and gore kind of horror movie, this isn't that. But this is still a really good movie, and it is a parody of horror films, but I figured, why not? I'm putting it on this list. It's my channel. I'll do what I want. Alright, next up, we're going to talk about Maximum Overdrive. This is a Stephen King film, directed by Stephen King film, based on a script by Stephen King. King hates this movie. He was high on cocaine through the entire production of it. I love this movie. This is a fun film. Basically, one day, all electronics gain sentience and try to kill the human race. That includes carving knives, toasters, lawnmowers, vehicles, obviously. Maximum Overdrive is vehicles. A bunch of people are hiding out at a gas station, when the semi-trucks come to life and kind of hold them hostage, because eventually they need gas. And they realize they can't fill it themselves, so they need to keep the humans alive to fill their tanks. So it's about the humans figuring out, what are they going to do? How long is this going to last? This is kind of like the zombie apocalypse of vehicles. How do you kill a vehicle? Like, it is way harder. Like, you can't shoot the vehicle in the brain because a standard bullet isn't going to do it. You need to, use explosives on those things, which is what they end up doing. This is and this is long before, copyright issues with Marvel, because the main truck is a toy truck with a giant green goblin face in the front of it. It is amazing. It is a super great movie, and it is one of my favorites. Next up, we have The Frighters. Dead yet? This is a Peter Jackson movie before he did Lord of the Rings. This is actually the movie that made people go, he can do Lord of the Rings! Again, much like Death Becomes Her, this movie was meant to be a Tales from the Crypt movie. It was supposed to be Tales from the Crypt presents The Frighteners. But again, Robert Zemeckis and the other producers of Tales from the Crypt looked at the script and went, we can sell this on its own. This can be its own thing. So The Frighteners was released as its own thing. Michael J. Fox stars in this one. He is a paranormal investigator who, after his wife died, began to be able to see ghosts. 3 ghosts in particular help him out, so he can make money by actually haunting places. At the same time, people begin to die with numbers carved in their heads that only he can see because they're ghost numbers, which reminds him of a serial killer who is now dead, who also carved numbers into his victims' heads because he was keeping score of how many people he had killed. This leads him to try to figure out how he's connected, how he's being released, and how to stop him before he achieves what he wants, which is to kill a lot of people and have the biggest score of any serial killer alive or dead. It's a great movie. Michael J. Fox is tremendous in this film. He is a lot of fun. And it's just very well done. It is a very well done movie. And definitely, if you've never checked it out, check it out. Again, it's not a gory movie. It's not like a scary, gory horror film. It is just a good horror film. Also, Jeffrey Combs is in it. He is from Bride of Reanimator and Reanimator, which did not make this list, unfortunately. But Jeffrey Combs is in it. He's a great actor. And he is really good in that movie, playing the detective who's investigating the murders. Alright, next up, we have Trick or Treat. This is another anthology horror film, and this is the second to last movie on this list. That is right. Out of all these horror movies, this is not my favorite. This comes in second place, a close second. But we have Trick or Treat. It is the last anthology horror film we'll be talking about today. Basically, it's kind of based on a comic book. There wasn't really a comic book, but the idea is a very comic kind of thing. You have your main character of Sam, who is kind of the through thread, as this one has no overarching story, because all the stories take place on the same night in the same town. Basically, you have a man who lives in the town who actually murders children and uses them for various art projects. You have a group of girls who are in town who are looking for boyfriends for the night. The youngest of them, it's her first time, and she begins to be stalked by a man in a Dracula costume who has sucked the blood out of people you've already seen in the film. You have a story about a group of kids who are stealing pumpkins to go down into a quarry where a bus full of special needs children was drove into many Halloweens before because the parents didn't want their special needs children anymore. And you finally have a man who hates everyone, hates Halloween, and is confronted by Sam inside the house. All of these stories are beautifully connected. It is a great horror film. The man who made Trick or Treat also is the one who made Krampus. He also made Godzilla King of the Monsters, if you went and saw that. That is all his. Those are his movies. He makes great movies. It is a fun horror film, and it's worth checking out, but not as much as my number 1 horror film that either only has one sequel, stands alone, or is the only movie in its series worth watching, and that last one really is why. 10 Cloverfield Lane, although part of the Cloverfield series, really, each of those movies can be taken on their own. This one has direct sequels. This is the only one worth watching. And it is The Return of the Living Dead. I love this movie. It is hard to say if I like this zombie movie more than the Resident Evil or the George Romero Dead series. It's hard to say if I like it more. But I do like this movie. It's a fun movie. Basically, you have a medical supply warehouse that keeps cadavers. They were one day shipped a shipment of containers containing cadavers that reanimated. It is Night of the Living Dead. They have the cadavers from Night of the Living Dead. The story was completely changed for that movie, but these are the actual cadavers. They couldn't be killed. Shooting them through the head doesn't actually work. So they were put in these containers and sent to the wrong place. Well, showing around a new hire, one of the containers ruptures, reanimating a corpse upstairs and poisoning both the new employee and the person training him. They call their boss. They try to get rid of the body that is reanimated, but they can't because every part of it is alive. You cut off its arm is still alive. Cut off its head is still alive trying to eat you. But they don't want to eat flesh, they just want to eat brains. Because brains apparently cures the pain of rigor mortis. How sweet. So anyways, they chop up the body and take it across the street to a crematorium that's connected to a cemetery and burn the body. While this is all going on, a group of punks are in the cemetery having a party because they're waiting for the new employee to get off work to party with them when it starts to rain. The rain is poisoned by this gas, reanimating all the corpses in the cemetery, now creating an army of the dead who begin to try to feast on brains and hunt down all of our characters. Throughout the course of this movie, you find that the two people poisoned are slowly turning into zombies themselves, and you learn that the military has had their eyes out looking for these missing canisters since they went missing. It is a fantastic movie. It is a movie worth checking out. Just for the hell of it, it is a fun movie. It is a gory movie, but it is a fun movie. It's also got nudity. It's one of the most famous nude scenes in movies, as Leanna Quigley, who we talked about in Sorority Babes and the Slime Ball Bolorama, does a striptease on top of a coffin, on top of a monument to music. It is a great scene, but again, the scene is what it is. But it is a fun movie. It did spawn a bunch of sequels, 4 sequels, I believe, and they're not good. I've watched 3 out of the 4 sequels. One of them isn't bad. The other 2 I watched are bad. They're bad, and I never watched the 3rd movie, actually, in this series. I've never seen that one. They're not good, but the first one is so good. It is such a lot of fun, and it's definitely worth checking out. Alright, don't forget to check back next week when we start franchise month of horror films, and we're starting with George Romero's Dead series. That is Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead, Land of the Dead, Diary of the Dead, and Survival of the Dead. We'll touch on the remakes of those movies as well. And that's next week. Don't forget to hit like to get more video. To like this video, hit subscribe to see what I'm coming out with next. Leave a comment if you have one, and don't forget, bonus videos are now airing on Thursdays. Smaller bonus content, because this was long and rambly, and I definitely can tell I was long and rambly. So, see you next time. Have a good one.